and welcome again to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, Integrity Deficit Disorder. We have as our guest today Dr. J. Baruch, who is the author of Tornado of Life, a doctor's journey through constraints and creativity in the ER. Are you there, Jay?
I am here, John. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Would you prefer me to say Dr. J or how would you like that?
I respond to Jay just fine.
Okay. Okay. Well, I respond to John too. So
Great. So we're good. Two
that's
simple
right.
names. We love it.
We're something in common. I have a little bit here as part of a review that I want to have my listeners. Jay Baruch is a professor of emergency medicine at Alpert Medical School of Brown University, where he directs the medical humanities and bioethics scholarly concentration. His work as an ER doctor, a writer of fiction and essays, and medical educator and keynote speaker share an appetite for messiness and problem finding. And that's one of the many accolades that I found all over your book from the people that did your reviews. Um, let's see. I want to ask you, since it was in the introduction, but I've seen it referred to otherwise, and maybe it has a larger span than I thought. Um, what is messiness for me? Is it a
I'm using messiness as a all-encompassing term for the fact that, at least in medicine, and I think now we in our sort of in societal in our conversations, we seem to be, taking sides. Like we have one opinion or another, or we have a particular worldview or another. And the truth of the matter is that, we're all sort of complicated characters, right? With multiple different motivations, with different things going on in our lives. And our behaviors and our actions oftentimes are very complex, right? And we don't necessarily have the tools or necessarily even now the willingness to embrace that middle, right? To sort of embrace complexity, these contradictions that really embody all of us, John, right? Like we're all like multiple different types of people where our virtues and our warts. and I think most of us, if anything, I think we just want to be understood by others, right? And to be able to have that type of conversation.
right? Right. Part of that says to feel the weight of searching for answers when we haven't figured out the questions. I thought that was a unique statement.
Yeah. And, in medicine in particular, John, we're so focused on like, okay, what's the diagnosis? Like, what's the answer? What does the person have? And there's a reason for that, right? There's people come in with life-threatening problems, or if you have if you have a cough and a fever, and let's say the oxygen level in your body is low, I'm thinking about a pneumonia. And if you have a pneumonia, I should diagnose a pneumonia and I should treat appropriately your pneumonia and any infection in your body, right? There are certain things that I'm expected to do. Same thing with like if you have a heart attack. However, people oftentimes come into the emergency department for so many different reasons, not just ailments of the body, but social issues, mental health issues, substance issues, and sometimes combinations of all of those things, if not more. And what they all have in common is they have a need to tell a particular story, right? And if we try to treat everybody as a problem to be solved, to try to categorize them, then we're oftentimes not giving a full weight to the complex needs and what they're trying to tell us, and we're not looking for the very things that they want us to find. And sometimes these experiences are just so hard to put into words, and they want us to ask questions, right?
Right. Lots of questions.
Lots of
Um,
questions.
yeah, lots of questions. I see here that you have actually, this is your third book.
My third book.
Tornado of Life. I've got it right here in my hand. I'm a table of contents person, and I had a great time with your table of contents. And we'll get into that a little later on.
I will.
Um,
I'm intrigued.
that's the life of the book. That's the life and breath of the book is how I took it. But with it being your third book, you have two previous books. One was 14 stories, doctors, patients, and other strangers.
Right.
The second one was What's Left Out. Um, and then I saw it was a short fiction collections.
Yeah. Also fiction.
Uh-huh. Um, Now this is the Tornado of Life. You're living this one.
This is nonfiction.
That's right, nonfiction. I've got a nonfiction, so I can tell
Yeah.
the difference. Um, the thing that I thought was so much must be coming at you at 90 miles an hour, and not having that time to even think about it. You're probably reacting to uh, and take me off the stage here. You must be reacting just as fast as quick as you can in the ER.
Yeah, you do. Sometimes sometimes you have some time, not, and what we consider a some time is oftentimes very little time, but it's a little breathing room, and other time that's spent going to the bathroom or grabbing a coffee. Um, but that's part of the reason why I write, John, because I've always for decades, I've written to sort of try to make sense of these challenging experiences that I've been facing, and oftentimes those emotional experiences and those challenges found their way into um, as jumping off points into fiction, into the world of the imagination. And then, for this particular book, many of these challenges got sort of shaped in a nonfiction form because they demanded that type of
Hmm.
attention and fealty to real life.
Hmm. I found with my experience, my first book, that my narrative basically came from events, events
Hmm.
and transactions that I recall, and those were the ones that I could remember. Um, what people were wearing and what they were asking and what they were telling, that type of thing. It gives me a memory to think about, and then I can write about that or expand upon. And it works for me, or did for me, for that.
Yep. And I bet that there were probably some challenges or things that you were trying to figure out, which necessitated
Absolutely.
you to figure it out on the page, right? I mean, I
Hmm.
don't want to make a presumption, but most of the time that's what really pushes us to start putting words to the page and trying to figure things out, right?
Hmm. That's right. That's right. So,
Yeah.
and that worked out pretty good for me. Are you? It may be premature. Uh, are you working on your fourth book?
I'm always writing.
That's
It's
good.
not always good writing. It's not always good writing, but like a lot of my writing that I end up being proud of, everything starts off as not good writing. And yeah, so I never quite know what the form is going to take, but one thing that I'm always doing is scribbling and trying to
Hmm. Mhm.
put language to the page. And so, yeah, so I guess in some indirect form, I am like, it's been in my mind. I have a custom idea. So yes, I will give a definitive yes to that question.
Good, good.
And I'm gonna stick to it.
No, that's good. That's good. I think that it's a way that you find a way that it's a way that you find your way. I assume you have a journal that you keep or some scrapbook that you've got notes and things that you have little bits of paper that I threw in a box for 10 years before I finally wrote the book.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not a slave to writing every day. Like, right, if there's nothing I
Mhm,
have to, I don't feel like I have to write like my most mundane things
mhm.
down. It's really sort of things that sort of just stick in my mind, particular snippets, language, challenges, questions for myself. I don't know if you
Right?
do that. Like sometimes like, questions or like what if questions, like something happens and you go, what if this really happened? Like what if what I would really most feared if in this particular situation actually happened? Like, and what's so important about that, John, I think you probably feel this too, is that like they're so vital to you, right? And they're so raw and they're so concrete if you can just get it down.
Mhm,
And even if you come back to it later, it's still down. And I
mhm.
don't know about you, but my memory is like sometimes like stuff I think I'm gonna remember, like it's there. I go, there's no way I'm not up. There's no absolutely none, not in 1,000 years am I going to forget this, because it is like a really good idea or a really interesting insight, and it
Right.
is gone unless unless I
There's
write it down.
there's too
It
much.
is gone.
You're packing in too much.
It's
Uh,
gone. It's like
Jay.
any small breeze and it's gone.
Well, I could. One of the reviews was beautifully written with a different take on life, and I did a double take on that one, just so I could go back and look at that and think. And sure enough, why not?
And
He has
maybe,
some good reviews.
I think what I take that as I took that as I frame that in a positive way. I think
Yeah.
sometimes my take on life, people like, oh, Baruch, just just shut up already. Let Baruch go. Let him
Right.
talk.
Go ahead.
And it's amazing, John. Like you write, like you talk about, and I mean, we're joking around a little bit here, but there were
Sure.
so many things that were sort of in this book that I've talked about in various different venues, and sometimes because it is a different perspective. It's like it's looking at medicine through the lens of someone who's a writer who's looking at it from who's looking at some general sort of foundations of how we practice medicine and what information we value, and trying to break that down and looking at it through the lens of saying, God, this is actually more harder than we think, and we need to think about this differently. And stuff that that reviewers and people who I've talked to in various forms have framed in a positive way. I think when I just mention those in conversations or in meetings or in teachings, I would get eye rolls. But somehow now that it's in paper, people are like, okay, maybe this guy isn't as insane as I thought he was
Uh-huh.
when I listened to him in that meeting 2 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right. That can certainly be the case. Um, Here's one that said, Physician Baruch recounts in this unflinching essay collection the professional challenges he's encountered both pre-COVID and from the worst of the pandemic. Baruch has a knack for narrative and writes in refined prose. That's quite a compliment.
I'll take it. I take it where I can get it, John. I am a you should know that I am a pathological rewriter. So like, I wasn't joking around earlier on, John, when I said like I'm writing all the time, that I'm writing terrible drafts. They are like they truly are, and I think if I'm good at one thing in the writing process is I think the stick to itness to rewrite and to make sure I get it right. And so when I hear something like that, I feel like I actually have a sigh of relief that maybe
Hmm.
all those endless rewrites were not as pathological as I thought, but actually necessary, and perhaps produce something that was worthy of such comments.
Hmm. A question for you. At the medical school, um, if you looked at and gather an opinion about today's students, are they different than they were 5 years, 10 years ago? Or is it, is there something else that I'm looking for?
What do you mean by
Well,
different? Is there anything in particular that you're looking for?
are they smarter? Are they not? Are they more selfish? Are they considerate? Considerate? Um,
Ah, I don't know. I mean, I am very fortunate, John, in the fact that the medical students that I have a chance to work with
mhm,
are uh, people I think are just extraordinary people, general. You know, first
mhm,
and foremost, I think they're going to be fantastic doctors, but they're just amazing people who also are just ridiculously talented. You know, I oftentimes find, John, that we there's so many students in medical school who bring such a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information to the practice of medicine, to becoming a doctor, and that includes sort of people who are not just really smart, but they're actually very accomplished artists, and a lot of them are very accomplished researchers. They're so they really are so talented, and and we and as and I often find that what I all I have to do is actually give them permission to be them, like to take the artist side of them too, because the artist side of them is really important for connecting with our patients, understanding patients as well.
right.
Um, and especially when you're talking about um, especially when you sorry, especially when you're talking about, I'm sorry about that. Should I start again?
Sure, you bet.
Um, yeah. Um, I'm just gonna shut my phone off. Um, the students are so wonderful. They're so talented in so many different things. And a lot of times what I'm trying to do is just give them permission to take all their talents to the task of being a physician, of
Hmm.
being, you can be a, a scientist, you can be a writer, you can be an artist, you can be a humanitarian, you can be a researcher, and you take all those hats and all those sensibilities, and you shouldn't just use one dimension. Don't diminish the art side, because you're going to become a medicine, you're going to need that art side to be creative and to engage with others. So I feel like we have so many talented young future doctors, and we have to make sure that they remain inspired and encouraged. I'm also both a little bit I'm frustrated, I think, in the sense that there's so many students I know who are trying to get into medical school
Right,
who can't get in, who are,
right.
I think, are going to be extraordinary physicians, but and their grades were great, but they're not like super great. But like for some reason, just the entrance criteria and the barriers that kids who had to work two jobs while in college. So, people who are incredibly motivated and faced obstacles, who are going to be incredible doctors. So I'm hopeful, I'm very hopeful for the physicians, for as an older person and hopefully a future older person.
Hmm.
I'm very happy about the people who are going into medicine. I just hope the healthcare system accommodates them and lets them be the brilliant people, the brilliant caring people that they want to be.
Hmm. Let's get back to the contents, table of contents.
Yes, let's
Uh,
do that.
you're in three sections, it looks like. One is vulnerability,
Yep.
two is constraints, and three is possibility. Can you elaborate on those for us?
Yeah. I mean, so we wanted to provide some kind of organizational structure. So the premise for the book is not just, I didn't just want to talk about experiences. I actually wanted to take the reader through the experience. I wanted them to have a sense of what it's like to move from story to story, shorter ones, longer ones, not always having a resolution at the end, and sort of moving them through. However, we also wanted to sort of provide a little bit of structure for the readers to sort of think about as we move through that journey. And so we wanted to provide sort of an architecture for the book that is sort of there internally. It might not be totally obvious, and that's where the topics came up from. And I feel like one thing we don't really talk about that much in medicine is vulnerability, and the many forms that vulnerability takes. Not just the vulnerability of our patients, but also the vulnerability as caregivers, as caregivers, and also as healthcare providers. And I wanted to be very upfront about that, because I don't feel like that idea about vulnerability truly is conveyed. Like, we talk about it sort of, but we don't really examine all the dimensions. And that was one of the things I wanted to get across at the outset about, and I think with vulnerability is exposure, right? There's areas of being unprotected, of openness, of being dependent, all these sort of different factors that go into this idea about the vulnerability. And a lot of the pieces in that section sort of reflect upon that.
Well, that's good. I'm sure that they're in thankfulness of having that. I thought that constraints was one that is that a different kind of vulnerability?
Well, the constraints that we're all facing constraints in our lives, right? Whether it's whether it's lack of time, lack of money, a lack of opportunity, and and in the arts, constraints are oftentimes framed in a more positive way. Like, we'll use a particular poetic form. Like, listen, we want you to write in a villanelle or a sonnet, and the form and the particular structure forces you to be creative in a way, to sort of maybe use language or get ideas across in a way you normally wouldn't have. And in medicine is fraught with constraints, right? It's lack of time. I'm taking care of so many patients simultaneously. It's the problem of crowding in emergency departments, and the fact that we sometimes don't have enough beds to see all the patients that need to be seen. We don't have enough staff now, with a lot of people leaving medicine, or and then it could be constraints or emotional constraints, like the limits of our compassion. And again, so there's constraints all around us. And what I try to, in that section, what we try to examine is, again, like the multiple dimensions, like holding up a shimmering ball, and so the reader can see the different elements in different ways that constraints are manifested and dealt with. And also, hopefully, this idea that we often use the term constraints as in a negative way, like this is the limitations. But how do we sort of take that idea about constraints and also perhaps provide an opportunity and provide space for taking away that negative connotation from it, and say, can we use this to think differently, to innovate, to approach this in a different way, to convey it in a different way, and to use it to our advantage if possible.
Well, that's a good way to put it. Constraints might be good for you, or them, or those. Matter of style, I guess.
It might not. Like I guess there's degrees of constraints and types of constraints, right? However, I do what I did, what I was hoping to happen, and is this to at least open people up to the possibility that it's not always negative. And it's not always something to be complained about, that sometimes we need to use the constraints or find ways when we're in these positions of limitation to see if we can perhaps use it as an opportunity. And it's not always the case. And again, like all constraints aren't created equal. But are there moments when we can actually sort of stop and think about constraints differently?
You have 41 chapters, and number 41 is one last thing. Tell us about that.
So it was it was it was supposed to be, no, I love this. Um I was supposed to it was supposed to be 40 uh 40 chapters, it begins with a piece called Not the Beginning.
Right?
And then it was the ending was supposed to be not an ending, because in the emergency department and the stories that I hear from patients, like, we're deciding what's the beginning and what's the end of a story, right? We're saying your
Right.
story begins here and ends there, but oftentimes it's just an artificial, it's in itself is a constraint. Like, we're putting borders on an experience. Just like any story has a beginning and an ending, but there's always a backstory. There's always a possibility of what goes on in the future, right? So that was going to be my nice, neat, like, not the beginning, not an ending, though it's definitely is the beginning and definitely is an ending. But then we had, I, we submitted the book, and COVID is just circling, right? We're having another wave of COVID.
Right.
And I was putting the lens of narrative onto the sort of the challenges of vaccines, and the public conversation around vaccines, and I wrote this piece that got a lot of attention, and it was basically it took an issue with, well, both the people on the extreme left and the people on the extreme right, and coming back to one of the first questions you had, John, was like, listen, can we all meet in the messy middle and have conversations?
Mm-hmm.
And it really, again, like, it was fitting through, it was perceived, this problem was perceived through the lens of narrative. Like, can we think about this through the lens of narrative, and can we be more understanding receivers of each other's stories, especially those people who perhaps we disagree with, and we might actually have something in common, if we just invited them in, even just one step, into our story. And I thought that was important I thought that was an important way to end the book.
Right. It sounds good to me. I think that as I look around today, listening to the news and whatever's being tossed about, it makes you wonder, just makes you wonder. What's it going to be? What's it not going to be? What kind of shape's it going to be? Your book, this is the book, The Tornado of Life. And tell our audiences where what they can find a book for you.
You can find the book hopefully in your local independent bookstore, or online at any independent bookshop.
Right.
I like to recommend people to support your local bookstores,
Sure.
if possible, and if not, I mean, it is also available on that online behemoth that will go nameless. But it's there too, and I'm grateful that it's there. And if people want to get in touch with me, I have a website called www.jaybaruch.com. You can get in contact me through that site, and I'm also on Twitter at letter J Baruch Baruch MD, at J Baruch MD, and on LinkedIn, if people want to find me there. But
Good.
I'm very happy and very thankful that you had me on, John. I'm very grateful.
Sure. My pleasure. Really is, Jay. And I want to thank my listeners who have been waiting for this half an hour. Tuning it in to Searching for Integrity puts a smile on my face. And I want to tell them and all of you so long and happy trails to all. John Smith, going home. Thanks very much.